Hi, and welcome to the Uplift with Dabney Brice, the podcast where we'll elevate global stories by shining a spotlight on underrepresented narratives, educating ourselves about current and historical events and diverse cultures and communities. Let's journey together to step outside our comfort zones, uplift each other, and make the world a little bit better along the way. Welcome, my uplifters. I'm your host, Dabney Brice, and I'm so happy because we made it. After a couple months of planning, researching, editing, and more, we made it to launch day, and I'm so excited. But before we get into the episode, I just want to thank a couple of people for all their support and for helping me get to this point. I want to shout out Chelsea, who helped me come up with the title of the show. You'll learn a little bit more about why I chose the name, The Uplift. I want to thank Julia at Jules Crafts. She designed my cover art and my logo. Thank you so much, Julia. And I want to thank my friend Angel, who she was kind of the original inspiration for the cover art, and Julia kind of took it and upgraded it. So thank you so much, Angel, for that. And I want to thank my family and friends who knew about my little secret and just continue to encourage me throughout this whole time. I love you all. I thank you so much for your support, and it means the world to me. So, on this first episode, you're going to be learning about yours truly, my background and story, which is strongly connected to why I started this podcast. I'll also be talking about what you, as the audience, can expect each week and what I hope you will gain from listening. I'm excited to be here, and I hope you are too. So let's dive in and get started. All right. So, why did I start this show? I think it's important for me to, before I get into the why part of it, to talk about the timeline and how I got here. And sort of when the pandemic came, when coronavirus sort of shut down the world. So basically a year ago, I was in grad school. I was getting my master's in public administration at the University of Delaware. And I was working as a graduate or as a fellow for the Institute for Public Administration under the university. And when things shut down and we had to go virtual, the whole the institute was thinking of how can we stay connected to people while doing this virtually. And so they decided that they would start a podcast. And if you're into public administration and specifically within Delaware, definitely advise you to go check out their podcast. But my office that I worked for, the conflict resolution program, they decided that they would do an episode. And my supervisor, Leanne, she was like, yo, we should do one on how to have difficult conversations and how to talk to difficult people. And she's like, you work on it, you work on the script, you work on the questions, and we'll record. And so we did that. And the response was really great. I had so many friends and family reaching out to me saying you have such a good podcast voice. And also the episode was really good and helpful. And that was such a shock to me because I wasn't really thinking about oh, how is my podcast voice? I knew I wasn't bad at it, but I wasn't thinking about that. And so that sort of planted the seed of maybe one day I'll do a podcast. And I remember talking about it with friends and maybe I'll do it one day, but it wasn't oh, I'm going to do it soon. It was just maybe one day. And then I graduated and I was looking for jobs hard. So on top of that and the pandemic and then everything with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery happened and all the protests that were happening around the country, I was just I don't know, the seed, it was starting to water. This idea of having a podcast was starting to water. And it wasn't until I would say around October that I decided that I was going to do it, or the end of October, November, that I was like, okay, I'm going to toss my voice into the podcast world, into the ring. And another aspect of it was I wanted to get back into my creative side. I've been doing school for the past, or like my master's program for the past 2 years, and I wasn't able to do like the things that I loved, like theater and singing and dancing. And this was sort of my way of getting back into that, and um, to try out my creative brain again because I've missed it so much. And so with that, and I think on top of that, another thing to add with tossing my name, my voice into the ring, with all of this discussion about racial equity and racial injustice in our country, I knew that there were so many podcasts being thrown about, but there's a million bajillion podcasts. I think there's over a million podcasts. And I'm sure I haven't looked into like the demographics, but I'm sure as the way things work in our society, especially in this country, um, there's not a lot of diversity. Even though there's a million podcasts, like there's still more room for people like me, a Black woman, to have her voice heard and to have this platform where I can share my thoughts and um, like my voice matters at the end of the day. And so I was like, you know what? Let's just do this. Like, can never have too many Black people with a podcast. Really, honestly, can't have too many BIPOC with a podcast. So here I am. And so that was around November. And I knew I wanted to start one. I decided I was going to start one, but I didn't know what to talk about. There was so many different things that I could talk about. I was like, oh, maybe I should do one just so focus on theater, but like theater's not opened right now. What really is there for me to talk about? I guess I could like, I thought about like, so fun fact about me, I'm really into like The Bachelor and trashy reality TV because it makes me, I don't know, feel better about my life because I'm like, wow, I'm not there, which is great. Um, so like my friend was like, oh, maybe you should do a Bachelor one. I was like, nah, no, I want to be taken, not that Bachelor podcast shouldn't be taken seriously, but I just wanted a different route for me. So then this is like, I was, if I don't know why, but some of my best work happens late at night. I'm a night bird. I Mornings do not wake me up. I can sleep in to like noon if I could. And it's not even like sleeping in. Like I'll wake up at a reasonable time, like 8, 9 o'clock, but I will stay in bed forever. You can ask my family. If I could, I would stay in bed all day. So it was, I'm, I, my, I work best at night. And so one night I was doing my research on podcasts just because I was like, you know what, like if you're going to do this, let's make sure you're informed, that you know what to do. And I was like, let's see if I can think of um, a podcast idea. And I thought about, I don't remember the video and I apologize, but I watched so many videos, so it could have been all of them for all I know. But one video was like, think about what you know and what you could teach people, and think about what you enjoy and like more about who you are. And the combination of those two things would like that should be what you talk about, what your podcast should be about. So I wrote down a list and wrote about what I knew. So like with that, I thought about like my degree. I was like, well, I know a lot about policy and I know a lot about trashy reality TV and pop culture. And I knew a lot about theater and I'm a huge history nerd. So I know a lot about history. And so I was writing all these things down. And then I thought on the other end, like who I am personally, I was like, well, I'm really good at building relationships. I'm really good at um, mentoring people and bringing people up with me. And that sort of ultimately led me to thinking about who I am and my story. And this is sort of when we get into my origin story. So I am the daughter of two Haitian immigrants. Shout out to my mom and dad. And but I'm first generation. I was born in New York. I'm the oldest of three. Shout out to my siblings. And I was born in Westchester, and I grew up there until I was about 5. So before I started first grade, we moved um, more upstate. I don't call it upstate. New York City people will call it upstate, but it's really not that far from New York City. But we moved about like an hour away from Westchester. And that town is predominantly white. It's very white suburban town. It's gotten more diverse as I've grown up, and it was interesting to like see that as I grew up. But when I got there, it was like it was so white, the most diverse part, at least like in terms of my school district and like where I grew up, the most diverse area um, was either the city right near us or like um, certain pockets of like different developments. So like the development, so the development I lived in was very diverse comparatively compared to like the rest of the town I grew up in. Um, like down the street, like there was Black families, Latinx families, white families, Asian families. Like those were my neighbors. So my street was very diverse, but like the overall town wasn't. And so growing up in a white suburban town, I know what it's like to be overlooked and undervalued and to be typecasted and to be the only Black girl in my classrooms. Um, and I remember, like, and I've noticed that since I was a little girl, definitely. And a lot of that was because of like my hair and kids thinking that they could touch it and asking me questions literally every week, y'all. I had someone ask me like, "Oh, your hair grew. How'd that happen? Like it grew so fast." And this may have been a little it may have been a little mean, but low key funny at the same time. Little Dabney, young Dabney, I got so annoyed with it growing up. I think by the time I was like middle school, high school, I just said like, "Oh, like we have like this spray that like makes our hair grow super fast." And people believed me, like straight up were like, "Oh, really?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah, like it's a thing." I was just tired because it was like the same people. And look, this is after explaining how my hair works. So being like, "Oh no, it's extensions." Like I braided my hair and added hair so that it could be longer. Just like anyone could do. It's not hard. Anyone could add hair. So I'm digressing, but I had to say this, get this off my chest, I guess. But yeah, that's what I would tell people. Basically, I knew that I was Black, and since I was very young, since I started school, honestly, and I knew that in the context of where I was living, it was different. I was different. And I remember my mom telling me because I was Black, I was a woman, and I was Haitian, that I would have to work 10 times harder than everyone else. You know, the saying, like, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. Like, I knew that since I was a little kid. And so I did everything to this point. Like, I'm an overachiever. I do not know how to take a break sometimes. I thankful enough that I have a really right now great support system that keep me accountable, hold me accountable when I am doing too much and I'm doing a million things. And learning how to say no was very difficult for me. It's still very difficult for me. And I think a lot of that is based off of like having that in the back of my brain of knowing that I have to work 10 times harder than everyone else because of who I was. And that's not any fault of my own. It's just you know, white supremacy and racism, and um, that I have to deal with and will probably have to deal with for a very, like, pretty much probably for the rest of my life, if I'm being honest. Because those things, white supremacy just doesn't come down easily. Like, it's just not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years and years of hard work. So, that being said, knowing that and having that internalized from a very young age, like, looking back on it now, like, I just wanted to be heard and seen as a kid. I wanted someone to notice me and be like, I see you. I see you, Dabney. I see you trying. I know it's not easy, but like, I see you and I commend you for working through that. And I think I still have that part of me. I still have that feeling, and I know that I'm not alone in that. And that's sort of the reason why I wanted to start this, because I knew I wasn't alone. I knew, and I know so many people who fall under these underrepresented categories that don't have this platform to share their stories. Because even if you do fall under that as like being underrepresented in our society, we all have our own unique histories and stories and backgrounds. Like, not one of our stories are the same. And that's sort of the beauty of diversity, the beauty of not everyone looking alike and not everyone having the same identities and backgrounds. Like, that's the beauty of this world, and that should be celebrated and that should be embraced. And I wanted to be a part of uplifting, hence the name, uplifting those people and being a part of the solution, and being a part of pushing our society forward. And it was just, I don't know, with the pandemic, with unemployment, graduation, with all of that, I just thought, well, Dabney, there's no better time than now because tomorrow's never promised. So let's do it. Let's do it. And I was talking to a friend, I think it was my best friend, one of my best friends, and telling her about my idea of like, I want to share other people's stories. Like, that's what I want to do with this podcast. And she said something very pointed to me. She was just like, oh, yeah, you've been doing that pretty much your whole life, Dabney. And it clicked. I was like, oh, you're right. You're right. So I've been sharing stories about my history and my culture and my travels my like whole life. I remember growing up in elementary and middle school, whenever we would have show and tell, I would always bring Haitian food and tell my classmates about Haiti, because no one ever knew. Everyone had so many different opinions and misconceptions about Haiti. And I was like, no, 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 no. Or they didn't know that Haiti was a country. They were like, what's Haiti? Where's that? And like so many like microaggressions and ignorant comments like, oh, is Haiti in Africa? And especially after the earthquake that happened in 2010, anytime I talked about Haiti, all I got was, oh, how's your family down there? Or, oh, it's so sad what's happened in Haiti. And I didn't, so whenever there was a show and tell or like we had to talk about our families, I made sure that people knew more than what they saw on TV and what they heard from other people. And I did that in college too. Like, shout out to my girl Esther, my friend Esther. Um, she's one of my Haitian friends that I met in college, and we were RAs together. We were resident assistants together during undergrad in the same area. And so we had this idea to basically do like a Haitian night with both of our residents and bring them together. And so we had my parents and my godmother come, and her mom and aunt came, and they cooked for all of our residents and talked to them about Haiti and Haitian culture and like answered their questions about Haiti. And it was so like, I'm telling y'all, like, all the food was out, like all of my residents, and I still have residents today that tell me like, oh yeah, like that was a pop-in night. Like that was one of the highlights of our undergrad experience. So I've been doing this since I was a little girl, and why not just not only lift up my culture and people like me, but others as well. And so that's how the Uplift was born. So why did I call it the Uplift? Why the title? So I looked up, shout out to my best friend, Chelsea, one of my best friends, Chelsea. Y'all will catch her on a different episode. Um, I suck at coming up with names. I'm not, that's, that's not my thing. I'm really like, even coming up with these episode titles, y'all, like it's been a struggle. So I asked her for help, and she came up with the Uplift. And she's like, yeah, I don't, when you talk about it, like you mentioned that word a lot. So like, why not? And then I took it upon myself to look up the definition of uplift. And according to the dictionary.com, the website, to uplift is, or uplift is the act of lifting up or raising up. So that's the common knowledge of what we use uplift for. But the second one is sort of the one that struck out or hit close to home for me. The other definition of uplift is the process or work of improving socially, culturally, morally, or intellectually. And I don't know, reading that, I was just like, yeah, that's it. That's what I want people to get out of this. That's what I want this show, this podcast to be. Like I want y'all to be on this uplifting journey, this uplifting process with me, even though it's my name in the title, you know, like the Uplift with Dabney Brice. I'm in this with you because I'm not perfect. There's still so much more for me to learn. And I don't know about y'all, but I love learning, and I want us to travel on this journey together. And that's basically it. That's period. And that's on period. Like that's it. Like if we want our society to be better, if we want to embrace and love on people outside of our own bubbles, and to like finally eventually put an end to all of this division and hatred, we have to start with ourselves. We have to start learning, getting outside of our comfort zone and learning about other cultures and people and communities and histories, because they frankly they didn't teach us in school. They didn't. And so knowing that they didn't do that, okay, so what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And I don't know about y'all, but I'm doing something by having this podcast and bringing on um, friends and family, peers, experts to hear about from those underrepresented communities, and hearing about things that matter to them, and having getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and listening in on difficult topics and learning about difficult topics and having difficult conversations. So that's some of the things that you can expect. Also to have fun too, because like a lot of times, at least I know from being Black and Haitian, a lot of times we just hear about the seriousness, like the 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 poverty, the education, the political corruption. We hear about like the difficult topics. We hear about the sorrows really more than we hear about the joys. And so we're going to have fun too. We're going to play some games. Hopefully, like with every interview, going to have a little like fun portion, so that, and there's going to be some episodes where we're just going to be, I'm going to just at least for me, I'm going to bring on people that I know I can let loose and just be silly with, on top of having the serious conversation. And also with every episode, um at least hopefully every episode, some resources and links to articles, organizations, books, that you can go to so that you can continue learning more outside of just this, because it starts here but doesn't end here. And what I hope that you will gain out of this is a better sense of the world that we live in outside of your own bubble. So I want all of us to increase our knowledge and awareness of other people and to spread that new information to your own communities. So don't just keep it to yourself. Don't be selfish and keep it to yourself. Like teach your friends, teach your fam, teach your coworkers and be like, yo, like I learned about Haiti today, or oh, I learned about um, Central America, or oh, I learned about maternal health. Those are just examples of some of the topics that we'll get into. And then I want you to get active in your communities, not just spread the new information, but to be a member of our society and to get involved with in this the smallest way. It doesn't have to be this huge, like I'm not trying to create any activists or like no, but you can start by volunteering at an organization or donating your time and your money, mentoring someone. There's so many different possibilities, and I'm hopeful that I will give you places to start where you can look for those opportunities. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's me. That's who I am. This is why I started this podcast. Why I started the Uplift. And I don't know. There's a few months ago, I asked my old supervisor um, about 3 words that she would use to describe me because I was interviewing and they asked me that. And I just wanted to, like, they asked me that question, like, oh, what would your supervisor, like, how would she describe you? And I didn't know when I was being interviewed. So then I asked her so I could be better prepared. And she said that one of the words that she used was equitable. And yeah, I would say that I agree. I think the reason behind that is because I know what it's like to feel left out and to feel excluded. And I hate when others feel that way, even if I don't like you or if you're not like my cup of tea. I hate when people feel excluded, and I never want anyone to feel that feeling because I know that feeling. I've known that feeling before, and it sucks. And so my life effort is that's sort of like that's always translated into what I've done, whether that's my work in policy and history and global studies. All of it is just people making people know that they're worthy and that they're loved and accepted. Um, that's who I am, and so yeah, I hope you like that. I hope you enjoy that. I hope you enjoy me and the people that I'm going to be bringing on. I'm so excited for you guys to hear from them. And yeah, let's get started. Like, let's start uplifting each other. Let's start this journey together. I hope you all enjoyed the first episode. Now, for this section, before we close, I wanted to do episode takeaways and reflection and things that I've learned, and also asking you as the audience questions each week for you to reflect and think deeper on, and for you to just share your thoughts back to me. I don't know necessarily what to call it, either like Dabney's takeaways or reflection. So I would love to hear your ideas. So please come up with names, send me a DM, and I'll put a poll on my Instagram stories and the Facebook page so that all of you could vote on this, and I'll choose from the audience choice what I should call these takeaways and reflection. So for this episode, I hope that you all have a better idea of who I am and why I wanted to start this podcast and my own story and how I want to show up in the world. So, my reflection question for all of you this week is, what's your origin story and how does that impact how you show up or want to show up in this world? So, take time to think about that, and you can journal, meditate, talk to a friend, whatever you do for your reflection time. And please share with me your thoughts. I'll probably ask on my social media. So yeah, take time to comment or send me a DM if it's more personal. But thank you all so much for listening. And I can't wait for you all to listen to the other episodes. We got a lot of good things coming for you. So stay tuned.